Hello and welcome, my name is Jay, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how to make these two different kinds of styles of Dark Eldar or Drukhari or even Dark Elf towers for your Warhammer 40k games. So the first one I'm going to show you is this kind of style where it's like 3 or 4 panels glued together. To start with, I just drew some shapes that were sort of like Dark Eldar inspired, you know, points and curves and that kind of thing. Now this is one of the segments and I'm going to have either 3 of these or 4 of these. I transitioned this into like a proper Photoshop like drawing. The links for that will be in the description below if you want to follow along with me. Print that out onto some paper or card, whatever you want, and then I'm just going to cut that out and I'm going to use the first bit as a template. Now this is the outer size of this, so this is the bigger wall, this is the total size of one side. So I print that out into some card, cut that out of the card. Once you've got your template, you can use different materials for the construction. For this example here, I'm going to be using foam board, but I also do a version of XPS foam, like say like a 6mm thick. So I just trace out my template onto the foam board. Now I'm using a black pen on black foam board because I'm very clever like that. If you're going to have a spire where it's like 4 intersecting walls, then obviously you need to do this 4 times. If you're going to have just the 3, then you only need to do it 3 times. Once you've drawn your template onto your foam board, and then obviously you need to cut it out, and yeah, it can be a little bit tricky to do curves and stuff like that, but just be patient with a nice sharp blade is generally the best bet there. Then you'll end up with either 3 or 4 walls, and then if you wanted you could just leave it as that. However, I wanted to add a little bit more detail. It's still rather plain once I've finished, but I wanted to add a little bit more detail. So what I do is I take another template, which is like a smaller version of the big side panel. Now I'm going to print this directly onto some card. If you can't do that, you could of course print one and use it as a template on some card. Now you will need a minimum of 2 per side panel. So if you're doing the 4 intersecting sides, then you need 8 pieces of this card, because obviously you're going to need it on both sides. If you're only doing the 3, then you only need it 6 times. I print that out onto some card, cut that out of the card, and then it's just a case of gluing it to your foam board, which is pretty easy. I just use some PVA, put it on both sides, slap on the card, easily done. And then what we're going to do is we're going to clad this in card, maybe like an A4 sheet of card if you can. It's very ceap to pick up, or you know, even cereal box card would be fine. Then you want to cut out 5mm strips, and then you just want to glue it onto the sides of the foam board. Now you don't need to worry about the inside wall where they're going to get glued together, because you're not going to see that. So what I would recommend is to dry fit this, and where you've got like nice sharp corners, you want to fold the card just without putting any glue on it or anything like that. You want to fold the card in those places, and you'll see that it'll fit nicely, and when you come to glue it you won't have to worry about, you know, getting the folds in the right place and stuff like that. To glue it, I just use some PVA and then a little bit of super glue. Super glue and hot glue can all melt the foam here, but if you just try and use PVA, sometimes it won't necessarily hold and stick to it. So I used a little bit of super glue. Once you've clad your foam board in card, I actually do recommend going in with a bit of filler or spackle and filling in any gaps. I didn't do this until much later on. Once you've got your 4 like identical pieces, we're pretty much done here. The only thing we need to do is glue it together. Now you could just glue 2 together and then have the other 2 at 90-degree angles, but then they wouldn't all come to an equal point. So what I actually did is, because the foam board is 5mm thick, I was like, well, what I'll do is I'll cut a 5mm wide version of it. So it's 5mm by 5mm, as tall as I've got it basically. And then what I'm going to do is just glue my sides onto the 5mm square bit of foam board. Glue one edge on and then the other edge, and then both edges. I just use hot glue here. Again, hot glue can melt foam, so do be a little bit careful. And then I'll have a little bit of foam board just sticking up through the top. I just trim that off with a knife. I didn't like having the like 90-degree angles and the little gaps in the middle, so I take some more filler and I just sort of fill in the middle bit of it, and I also put a bit on at the top, you know, where the 4-way cross section is in that little foam board. It doesn't quite look right because the card is cladding it in other places, so filler on top, filler down the middle, and you're pretty much donezo. Now I did do a version of this using some XPS foam that I actually got my hot wire cut and cut out to like the right thickness, but you don't have to do that. The advantage to using XPS foam instead of foam board is that you don't need to clad the sides. So if you can buy like 6mm thick XPS foam, which you can in the UK on eBay, then this is a perfectly great material to use. I do exactly the same thing, except I'm going to do 3 side walls in this case. And then when it came to gluing it, I've provided like a little, like, it's 3 lines basically at 120 degrees. You could just use a protractor or something like that if you like, but I just printed it out and I used that as a guide to glue it. So wherever the line is, that's where I want one of my sidewalls to be. They're 120 degrees apart. Hot glue, the first one's going to be a little bit weak because there's not much of a contact area because it's just 2 edges gluing together. But then I filled it in with some hot glue and put on the 3rd wall, and then did the same thing with the filler. And you know what, it's pretty damn solid. It's not going to break anytime soon. So it is possible to do a 3-way spire, and I sort of prefer the 3-way spires. For painting it was relatively simple. I just black bombed it with some PVA and black paint. And then I did the cardboard bits on the inside in sort of like purple, trying to do like a brighter purple along the outsides of the cardboard for whatever reason. And I did purple right on the very edges as well of the side walls. It's a very simple paint job. It does look a little bit plain, but I'm pretty happy with it. We'll get into the prettier pictures at the end. I will now show you how to do the second type of spire. So for this type of spire, I must admit I had a little bit of a disaster, right? Because I tried to be a bit smarter than I actually am. What I tried to do is I printed out a template. The links will be in the description below. Now it does again have 2 different templates for this one. I've got the outer one and then the middle one. Once I got it onto the card, I was like, what I'll do is I'll get some 50mm thick XPS foam, glue my template onto that, and then I'll use my hot wire cutter to cut it out, which sort of sounds fine. And I did use it as a template and it does sort of work in theory, but in practice it never actually quite worked. What I ended up with was sort of like cutting lines. I think maybe I had my hot wire cutter on too long, but I wasn't getting nice crisp cuts, and sometimes the actual wire was sort of bending when I was cutting it, so it wasn't perfectly straight. So whilst it is technically possible, I would recommend actually just buying maybe like 6mm thick XPS foam, 10mm thick XPS foam. Use the 10mm one for the middle one and then 6 for the sides. You'd be golden there, and I think you'll end up with a pretty decent result. However, that's what I did. I got my template, glued it onto the XPS, cut that out, did that with both the templates, and then I sort of tried to slice down the 50mm thick so that I ended up with either like, you know, specific set widths, which in my case was 10mm and I think 5mm, but you know, it's neither here nor there. And even that was a little bit tricky because the shape of the template's a little bit like there's no straight edge. It was very difficult to get the right thickness. I managed to get one of them, and I probably could have done more, but yeah, what you're going to end up with is basically 1 middle bit and then 2 side panels. And then I literally just hot glued them together. Hot glue can melt the foam, but you won't really have necessarily much of a problem. But all I did was I cut out a base out of foam board, beveled the edges, glued them together, put sand on the base, painted the whole thing in black, and then I literally just dry brushed the spire in purple, and it looks really nice. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with the results. Not very expensive if you don't use the XPS, and in the UK, the XPS that you can get like as underfloor insulation, also pretty cheap. Thank you to my Patreons. I do really appreciate you guys. Thank you very much for sticking with me and supporting the channel. I do really appreciate that. Have a most beautiful day. Like and subscribe. No, don't bother subscribing. Just like the video. I've been told that liking is more important, so like the video. Goodbye.